The point of coding in PHP is to make your website dynamic or smart so that it can make logical decisions. And what I mean by this is that your website can make decisions based on what to do next, based on what the user does, or user input, user conditions, or parameters that you've set yourself in the code. So here's some examples of how that would play out in real time. So when a user logs into their account on your website, they're going to have to type both their username and their password. That's the common convention. What if their password is incorrect? What if they didn't type a valid email address? Or what if they forgot to type their email address altogether? So PHP can handle what to do in these scenarios using if, else, and else-if statements. Here's another example. What if a customer tries to buy a product on your website, but that product is sold out? You no longer have them in stock. PHP can let the user know that the product is sold out because you can program it to calculate how many items of that product are remaining. Another example, what if a user uploads an image that is far too large for your website to host? PHP can compare the uploaded image with the parameters that you set and tell the user to upload a smaller image size if it exceeds the limit, say 1 megabyte. So over here, I have if.php. I created a new file. Go ahead and do the same thing. Obviously, you can just copy it from the course files folder and remove everything in the body here so that we can start from scratch, or you can copy from a previous page. You kind of know the drill at this point. You can also just copy what I have here, so long as you're following along and not left behind in the dirt. So we have a PHP define up here. We're defining the constant if, else, ampersand, else if statements. Now keep in mind, else if is spelled this way. You can also spell it this way, but standard spelling is else if. It kind of looks like Elseif. Okay, now let's take a look at the syntax of an if statement. So I'm just going to go down here right below my level 1 heading that's echoing that title constant. So I'm just going to comment here, if expression is true, do something. Put another comment, if expression is false, don't do anything. So perhaps you're wondering what an expression is. I'll just give you a real quick explanation taken from php.net. Expressions are the most important building stones of PHP. In PHP, almost anything you write is an expression. Easy enough. The simplest yet most accurate way to define an expression is anything that has a value. Basically, an expression is just a fancy PHP programming way of just saying anything that has a value is an expression. So for example, in my PHP script here, if I were just to say the variable foo and assign the value 5, this is an expression. That's an expression. Or something like foo is greater than bar. That's an expression. This will make a lot more sense once it's in context. So PHP script right here, I'm going to show you the structure of an if statement. So we have if, and then expression goes in here, and then code to execute if true. So this is the basic structure of an if statement. If, expression, this basically is testing to see if it's true. So this basically says if this expression is true, code to execute within these curly braces if it is true. So let's actually make it real and a bit more functional. So I'm going to start off by setting a variable right here and just say foo, and I'm going to assign the value of 99, and then bar, I'm going to assign the value of 79. Now in expression, I'm just going to remove this because that's obviously just a placeholder. I'm just going to say foo greater than bar. So if foo, the variable foo, is greater than bar, code to execute if true. Let's actually execute some code. I'm going to spit out that variable there. Foo is greater than bar. Now save, and let's just see what happens here in our browser. And before I do that, I'm actually just going to grab these because those comments aren't actually in the right spot. I'm going to put it in the PHP script here so they can be real comments. There we go. Now let's go back to our browser. 99 is greater than 79. That is, in fact, a true statement because the foo variable has the value of 99, bar has 79. If foo is greater than bar, echo foo is greater than bar. And you can see here that the value is actually displayed on the screen, not this text. And you might be wondering why. And that's because I'm using double quotes here. So double string, double quote. Basically, if you have variables in double quotes, they will display on the screen as if they were the values themselves, not the actual text. If you were to use single quotes or single strings, you would get the original variable name. And why is that? Well, when you're in double quotes, you can actually have the actual values of the variables display on the screen. But if you were using single quotes, you would need to concatenate those values. So you'd have to do something like this. So foo, and then I'm going to concatenate is greater than, and then I have to close that, bar. So you'd have to do something like this. Let's see what happens. 99 is greater than 79, and there's no space there. There we go. So now it works with single quotes. So just a little kind of side note there. But I like using double quotes when I am needing to display some variables, the values of the variables, because it's easy. I don't have to do as much typing. So the expression that we just used here is testing. So this is the expression, keep in mind, if the value of foo is greater than the value of bar. This little symbol here is the greater than operator. There are a bunch of different operators that you can use here. And if you're familiar with operators or not, you could just go to w3schools.com, PHP operators, and it lets you know all the different operators. And this is basically the same across the board for most programming languages like JavaScript, jQuery, so on and so forth. So there's arithmetic operators. You can use plus, minus, multiplication, division, so on and so forth. Assignment operators, we've been playing with these with variables. So we have the equal sign, we have addition, which adds and assigns the value of y to x, subtraction, multiplication, so on and so forth. Comparison operators, this is what we use when we're making those expressions in the if statements. So if something is equal to, if something is identical to, not equal to, not identical, greater than, less than, that's what we're using here. And then there's other ones like increment, decrement operators, logical operators, things that we'll play around with once we get a little bit further in PHP. But go ahead and bookmark this. You might want to use that for reference. Okay, so now we've figured out how to execute some code if an expression evaluates to true. But what about when the expression evaluates to false? Often you'll want to execute some code if a certain condition has not been met. So this is where the else keyword comes into play. Let's look at else as an extension of the if statement. The syntax is essentially this. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to put a comment here. Else. Okay, so here I'm just going to, just a little bit of a skeleton here. Now else is tagged on here. There we go. So else looks like this. You have the expression. If it's true, execute this code. And then else, execute this code if it's false. Here, if it's false, nothing happens. But here, if it's false, this happens. So it gives you more power. Now, if we put it into practice, it could look something like this. Let's add a variable here, and I'm going to say the variable is called currently listening to, and I'm going to say Bare Naked Ladies. Now, for those of you who do not know, that is a Canadian band. I'm not just saying they're Bare Naked Ladies that I'm listening to, although that's funny. Okay, currently listening to Bare Naked Ladies. And now in my if statement here, I'm going to change this expression to currently listening to is equal to the Tragically Hip, another Canadian band. I'm going to echo, you are listening to, and then because we're in double quotes here, I could just put the value of the variable straight up, listening to. So if currently listening to is equal to the Tragically Hip, echo this statement. Otherwise, I'm going to put another echo statement here and say, taking a wild guess here. You're listening to, and then the variable currently listening to, and semicolon. So keep in mind that the two equals sign here, a symbol, is different than the single equals symbol. So this means is equal to, while the original one here assigns a value to a variable. So this is testing to see if this is equal to this. Whereas this equal sign here is actually assigning that value. So this is just saying, currently listening to, assign this value to that variable. This is saying check to see if it is equal to. So they are different. Okay, now let's just see what happens here on the screen. So you could see tacked onto the end here because I don't have a break tag. Taking a wild guess here, you're listening to the Bare Naked Ladies. There it is. So that's true. Or false, I guess you could say, because the original if statement evaluated to false, therefore it echoed this text right here. I'm just going to put a little break tag here. There we go. Taking a wild guess, you're listening to the Bare Naked Ladies. Perfect. Okay, now there's one last piece to the if-else puzzle. It's called else-if. Else-if is a kind of combination of if and else. Basically, it lets you add an additional expression to test against before you fall back to the else statement. So let me just show you the syntax so it makes more sense to you in context. I'm just going to put a break tag here as well because we're going to want to spit out some text. Else-if. So here is the basic structure of the else-if statement. Okay, so we have if expression, code to executive expression is true, else if alternate expression, code to execute if original expression is false, and the else if expression is true. Else code to execute if both previous expressions are false. So let's actually try this out in a real example. Again, I'm going to need a variable to test against. Fave programming lang. I'm just going to say PHP. And then in the expression, we're going to want to actually create an expression out of this. So I'm going to say fave programming lang is equal to, I'm going to say C++. So if your favorite programming language is equal to C++, I'm going to say echo your favorite programming language is, and then I'm going to spit out this variable here, fave programming lang. So that will spit out C++ if that is the case. Now we have an alternate expression to test against. So we're going to say fave programming lang is equal to PHP because we want this to be true so I could show you how it actually works. I'm going to echo, good one, you dig, and then spit out the variable here, fave programming lang, and then else, this is if it's false. I'm just going to echo, guess you don't like PHP or C++. Oh well. Okay, so here is our if, else if, and else statement. You can see how it works. Now let's save it and see what happens in the browser. Good one, you dig PHP. Now, what if you added what if you wanted more logic to your if statement? Well, you can add as many else if statements as you want, because you basically, if you want to test against a bunch of different things, so say if your favorite programming language is C++, else if favorite language is PHP, else if favorite language is C#, else if favorite programming language is jQuery, so on and so forth. And then you could just always end with the else. And so, yeah, that's kind of how the if, else if, and else statement works. Now remember, you can use different operators here. I'm just saying is equal to. I could say is not equal to, or I could say is greater than or less than, but that would only work obviously if you're using an integer that you could compare against. And you can play around with those different operators that I showed you using that PHP resource earlier with that website. And yeah, so those are your if, else, and else if statements. We're going to be playing around with these more in context as we go through the next few lectures. So hang tight and let's do this.